Right now, there are 8 billion of you. 8 billion humans on every continent, in every climate, in every corner of this planet. Cities stacked on top of each other, planes crossing every ocean every hour. 7 billion phones, 8 billion heartbeats. It feels permanent, it feels inevitable, like humans were always going to be here. But 74,000 years ago, that assumption almost became the biggest mistake the universe ever made, because 74,000 years ago, the human population dropped, not to millions, not to thousands, to somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 breeding adults, total, on the entire planet. That's fewer people than fit in a mid-sized concert hall. And almost none of them knew the others existed. This is not a theory. This is not a myth. This is written into your DNA right now, inside every cell in your body. And what caused it, and what happened after it changes everything we think we know about who we are, why we're here, and what we're actually capable of. The event has a name. Scientists call it the Toba catastrophe. 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano sitting beneath what is now Lake Toba on the island of Sumatra erupted. Not like any eruption you've ever read about. Not like anything recorded in human history. Toba released approximately 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash, rock, and gas into the atmosphere in a geological instant. To understand that number, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, one of the most destructive volcanic events in modern American history, released about 1 cubic kilometer of material. Toba was 2,800 times larger. The ash cloud didn't just cover Sumatra. It spread across the entire Indian subcontinent within days. It reached deep into Africa. It blanketed the ocean. Archaeologists have found Toba ash layers in sites across India so thick you can still see them today, 74,000 years later, pressed between layers of earth like a gray scar in the ground. But the ash wasn't the real killer. The real killer was what came next. When Toba erupted, it pumped billions of tons of sulfur dioxide directly into the stratosphere. Sulfur dioxide doesn't just sit there. It reacts with water vapor and forms a reflective aerosol layer across the upper atmosphere. Sunlight hits that layer and bounces back into space. Less sunlight reaches the surface, temperatures drop. Global temperatures fell by an estimated 3 to 5 degrees Celsius on average. In some regions, the drop was closer to 15 degrees. That doesn't sound like much. But 3 to 5 degrees is the difference between a functioning ecosystem and a dead one. The volcanic winter that followed lasted somewhere between 6 and 10 years. 6 to 10 years of reduced sunlight. 6 to 10 years of failed growing seasons. Photosynthesis slowed across the planet. Plants died. The animals that depended on those plants died. And the predators that depended on those animals followed. The food web didn't bend, it collapsed. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, standing on a darkened, cooling planet with no understanding of what had just happened or when it would stop, were us. For decades, scientists assumed that modern humans had already spread widely across the globe before Toba. They assumed the eruption was devastating but survivable because the population was large enough and spread out enough to absorb the losses. Then the genetics came in. In 2010, geneticist Lynn Jord and his colleagues published findings in the American Journal of Human Genetics. They had been mapping the genetic diversity of modern human populations from every corner of the world, and what they found was deeply strange. We are almost identical to each other, not culturally, genetically. Every human being alive today, from Iceland to Indonesia, from Brazil to Botswana, shares a genetic similarity that is extraordinary for a species of our size and age. Here's how extraordinary. There are fewer than 300,000 chimpanzees left on Earth. But chimpanzees, as a species, carry more genetic diversity than all 8 billion humans combined. A single troop of chimpanzees in a forest in Uganda contains more genetic variation than the entire human species. That is not possible under normal circumstances. That is what happens when a species passes through a bottleneck. When the population gets so small, so fast, that the vast majority of genetic variation disappears with the people who carried it. Everyone who survived was similar, and because everyone who survived was similar, we are all similar now. You are not just distantly related to every human on Earth. You are closely related to every human on Earth. In evolutionary terms, we are one very large, very recent family. All of us descended from the ones who made it through. Think about what that actually means, not as a scientific fact, as a reality. At some point, a specific moment in time on a specific patch of ground, the human line narrowed to almost nothing. A few isolated groups, scattered, disconnected, each one unaware the others existed, each one not knowing whether they were the last. And if any of them had failed, if the wrong storm hit the wrong coastline, if one dry season lasted 1 month longer, if one group of children didn't survive one winter, the chain breaks. Not just for those people, for everyone. You wouldn't exist. Not just you personally, though that's worth sitting with for a moment. Nobody you have ever loved would exist. No one who has ever loved you would exist. Every idea that ever changed the world, every painting, every equation, every song that ever made you feel less alone. Gone. The entire human story, everything from the first fired clay pot to the moon landing, balanced on a handful of people huddled in darkness on a dying planet. Not knowing what they were holding together. Not knowing they were holding anything at all. So who were they? This is the part that surprises most people. The survivors weren't necessarily the strongest. They weren't the most aggressive or the most physically dominant. The evidence suggests they were the most adaptable. And more specifically, the most connected. Archaeological sites along the southern coast of Africa tell a story that starts well before Toba. At Pinnacle Point, a series of caves overlooking the Indian Ocean in what is now South Africa, researchers found evidence of human behavior dating back to around 164,000 years ago. These early humans were doing something that nobody else was doing. They were eating shellfish, mussels, barnacles, limpets. That sounds trivial. It wasn't. Shellfish live on coastlines. And coastlines, unlike inland forests and grasslands, are among the most stable food environments on the planet. When the volcanic winter hit and inland ecosystems collapsed, the coast kept producing. The ocean doesn't care about volcanic ash the way a forest does. Tidal zones kept cycling. Shellfish kept reproducing. And the people who had already learned to live there, who had already developed the knowledge, the tools, the habits, had a food source when everything else disappeared. Location wasn't luck. It was accumulated knowledge paying off at exactly the right moment. But food alone doesn't explain survival. Because surviving a catastrophe isn't just about calories, it's about coordination. It's about the ability to share information faster than the crisis can spread. In 2009, researchers studying Blombos Cave, another South African site, also on the coast, found something that stopped the archaeological community cold. Ochre. Not just ochre lying around, which had been found at other sites before. Processed ochre, ground into powder, mixed with fat and bone marrow. Stored in abalone shells sealed with a stone stopper. A toolkit, a system, a technology for producing and preserving a substance that has no caloric value whatsoever. You can't eat ochre, it doesn't keep you warm. It doesn't sharpen a blade, but ochre marks things. It marks bodies, it marks objects, it marks walls. It marked people as belonging to a group, carrying a status, bearing a message. Ochre is communication, and stored ochre, processed, preserved, ready to use, is something even more specific. It's communication across time. These people weren't just surviving day to day. They were producing a resource designed to carry meaning forward, to leave a mark that outlasted the moment, a pattern on a child's skin that the child would remember and pass on, a mark on a cave wall that the next group to shelter there would see and understand. This is what researchers call behavioral modernity, the ability to think symbolically.